Okay, I think we're live.
We are.
Well, welcome everyone. Welcome Hayley. Welcome Yesmith. I was just thinking to myself. I was saying to the ladies yesterday as well that I was feeling very more nervous about the technology and how unfamiliar I was with the technology than actually coming live for the very first time. So I'm feeling very great being sandwiched between Hayley and Yasmin, who are holding my hands on this live a little bit. And I'm feeling that is calming my nerves a little bit. But great to be here, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, whether you're live with us or whether you're watching this on replay. So the purpose and the reason that I created this live this week was, well, a couple of reasons really. So the first and foremost, around the fact that we launched the State of the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion survey. And we commissioned that a couple of months ago, where we had 100 people engaged in diversity, equity, and inclusion work completed, which is absolutely fantastic. So there are some really interesting insights. And Hayley and I were just reflecting on the fact that there wasn't anything shocking, because I don't think there's much that can shock us anymore. People who are actually actively engaged in this work. But there were some really, I think, interesting insights that we'll try and unpack today. And secondly, the reason why we're here today is because obviously we are in the month of December. So it will be a great opportunity to talk about how we can make 2022 a year of meaningful and impactful DEI action. So I am really, really happy that I have two DEI heavyweights joining me today, Hayley and Yesmith. And I've known both Hayley and Yesmith for a while now, and the reason for me inviting them is obviously because they are amazing at what they do, and they're very highly respected in the DEI space. But secondly, because two of the biggest respondents groups of this survey were UK and Ireland and Scandinavia. So I'm glad that I do have representatives from both of these spaces to help us unpack the survey in a little bit more detail. So before we go any further, and I hope that this sort of sets the scene a little bit what we're going to be doing here today, I would love to take the opportunity for both of you ladies to introduce yourselves, just so everyone knows how great you are. Hayley, shall we start with you?
Thanks, Barbara. I love that. It's a little pep talk to get us started. Hi, everyone. My name is Hayley
That's
Bennett,
right.
and I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant and campaigner, is what I've gone with as my job title. Because maybe we'll get a chance to talk about this today. I think this work, it encompasses so many different roles, and doing this work and advancing equity, diversity, inclusion can take many different shapes. And I tend to have occupied lots of different ones of those. So I actually started my career more on the campaigning side of things. I worked for an organisation called Kick It Out, advancing diversity and inclusion within football. I took an educator role, ended up deciding I better learn from some other sectors, because as we all know, football is not known as best practice when it comes to this kind of work. And I worked in another campaigning organisation as a consultant and advisor, went on to be a consultant within a law firm, and now work for myself. My passions definitely are diversity and inclusion and promoting equity, and my other passions are sport. So a lot of my clients and work is focused on what we can change in the sport world, working with sponsors as well, large businesses, and supporting charities and even schools. So yeah, really excited for today's discussion, and it's been really interesting to see the findings of your report, Barbara. Thanks so much for that.
No worries, and thank you so much for being here and holding my hand on one side. Yes, Smith.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Yes, well, my name is Yesmith Sanchez, and I am originally from Mexico, but I work here in Finland. I am based in Helsinki since 14 years now, and I work as a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant at an organization called Inclusive, which is one of the leading organizations here in the Nordics. And basically, I was listening to Haley's presentation, and I think that it's actually a good introduction there, because I think that I believe this is a topic that we all are passionate about, and then we also combine it with all other aspects of our lives. So in Hayley's case, it was about sport, which I think is a very relevant area. And in my case, all of my life and my career has been in business strategy. I have that is my background. I am a business strategist by formation. That's my educational background. But I have also been working with things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion for now over 12 years. And this is a topic that I didn't think about before actually being part of the underrepresented groups when I moved here in Finland. And for me, it's a great pleasure, but also a privilege to be able to combine what I am good at, which is business strategy, and what I love to do, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Yesmith, and thank you, Hayley, again. And so, again, welcome everyone who is here joining us live. Please interact with us. If you have seen the report already, let us know your thoughts. If you found anything about it shocking, surprising, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And as we unpack the survey today and talk about how we can move on from where we are today, just please let us know your thoughts. And if you have any questions, we will be picking them up as we go on today. So before I dive into the actual survey, I do have to ask, and probably the answer is no to that question, but I do have to ask, did you ladies find anything about the survey shocking or particularly surprising, or was there nothing there that can shake you up anymore?
Maybe I can start. Well, it wasn't shocking to find out, for example, things related to how lonely it can feel to do this kind of job, which I think is perhaps one of the biggest challenges, that when you are driving this kind of change, you kind of find yourself having people agreeing with you. Yet when it comes to the actual change and the actual actions, it's like, yes, I see your point, but you will have to do it alone. So I think that was not shocking at all. But because I like to find the silver lining, I also thought that it was interesting to find out that there were over 100 people answering to this. That is a lot, considering that this position in many spaces, and particularly here in Finland, is, for example, rather new. So that wasn't shocking, but it was a silver lining, if I may pose it like that.
I love the silver lining approach. Yeah, maybe I should have looked for one, but I think I'm kind of known as a pessimist in this space. I'm actually
or
saying,
realist.
or is it you, Barbara? I don't know. I think the bit for me that stood out, and I actually mentioned this to you before we went live, Barbara, was what page is it, just for reference for everyone who's got it open or wants to have a look at it later. I believe it's actually page 4, where we can see that actually over the past 18 months, what are DEI teams most proud of? And I mean, it's an interesting one, because I do think there's a lot of work to be done around how we measure impact in this space and what actually works. How do we know when we're actually working towards achieving systemic change? And we know that's going to take a long time. We know we have to create incremental changes along the way. But what we can see as the top 5 things on here, I do think are a bit disappointing, just in the sense that, first of all, these have been things that have been done for probably the past 10 years or so. So in terms of the dial shifting, we're not really seeing anything super innovative or new. I think, especially looking at the time frame, obviously we have gone through the COVID-19 pandemic. We're still in this, what people call like a racial awakening, with the Black Lives Matter movement really coming into our corporate environments and our organisations. So I would have probably expected to see a little bit more on this. That was really looking at systemic and more innovative solutions. So yeah, I think that was a bit disappointing for me. I would have loved for that to look like outcomes. So we've managed to, gain trust with our employees that this is something that we're taking seriously. We've worked with our suppliers and partners to ensure that they are committed to this. That kind of thing would have been nice to see. But I guess, this is the reality of this work, and that's why you've done this survey, Barbara.
100%, and I absolutely, and I share both of your sentiments around the survey, and what were some of the silver linings, but equally what were some of the disappointing parts of it as well. And the things that you talked about, Hayley, is very much what we're going to be going into and unpacking today as well, because I thought that was a very important point that we can't miss and can't overlook. But what I would like to begin with is talking about executive buy-in and executive commitment. And that is a big one. And it's not in any way unique to diversity, equity, and inclusion work, because leadership and executive commitment is needed for any culture transformation, for any change initiative, if we want it to be successful and impactful. And so, we hear such stats as, 97% of HR practitioners feel that or think that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a business priority. We hear executives and HR leaders saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion topics are now, one of the top 3 priorities of their work. And yet we are also faced with the other side of it. So this is what the leaders and executives are saying. But when we asked a question to our respondents about how well respected, supported, and resourced they actually feel within their organizations, those rates are disappointing. And I know that Hayley and we spoke before the live, and she said she actually expected them to be even lower. So maybe you are a pessimist. But so we asked people to rate this out of 10, and they said, and they rated respect 6.4, support 5.9, and how well resourced or sponsored they were 4.7. So there's a real sort of trend of that sliding down and hitting the rock bottom when it comes to sponsorship. And that's a big one, because when it comes to sponsorship and resources, that is very much the leadership responsibility, because when it comes to the goals and strategy, that comes from them. When it comes to budgets, they are the ones who set it. When it comes to finances, they are the ones who distribute them. So on one hand, they are in all these surveys that have been commissioned are saying, this is definitely our priority. We understand it. We are investing in it, quote unquote. And then when we actually ask the people, do you feel your space is invested in? Well, it doesn't look, as promising and as positive. And I guess, hence my question around this, this sense of internal conflict or this sense of internal paradox, is that something that you have noticed and you share the sentiment from the work that you are doing in this space? That there is a real sort of disconnect and a gap between how executives perceive this work and how this work is actually actioned and supported. Hayley, Yesmith?
Yes, I believe that perhaps it's worth noticing that in Finland this talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is on the new side. Like we are taking the baby steps, and I think that puts us in a different position because I actually happen to be a very optimistic person. I realize that in my eyes, the advantage of this is that because also the society in Finland in general is on the homogeneous side, so the diversity aspect is not something that has been spoken so much about before, or it was spoken about from the perspective perhaps of gender or nationalities, but not from the holistic point of view. So I think that is where we are lagging behind as a country. But the advantage is also that I think that we can observe neighboring countries. Oftentimes we look at what is going on, for example, in Sweden, also in the UK, not only in the US, which is a very different context than the European context. That is important. I also think that in the sense that is an advantage here, because I think that when it started coming here, it actually was picked up by leaders. And I think that, for example, we at Inclusive, we had as a priority to to elevate the importance of inclusive leadership. And why that is happening is indeed because, as Viva said, it doesn't matter how much the human resources person is invested in it, or the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion is invested. If the leadership is not ready to use the power in order to actually advance this, then it's not going to happen. So in our eyes, it actually has to go from the very top level, and then it has to trickle down. And of course, in order to have tangible changes, it has to be something that comes from the individuals and from the organizations. And the only people who actually have the power to make that kind of change for structural changes and behavioral changes are leaders, because if you as a leader are behaving inclusively, and if you are leading by example and setting a tone for the organizational culture, then you have bigger chances that the people are going to be not only inspired but also invested. If on the other hand you have policies, you go all out with press releases, goals and whatnot, but then your behavior says otherwise, it actually may be even detrimental for the organization, that you are saying something but you're behaving otherwise. So I believe that in this sense, in Finland, I would dare saying that that the leadership is realizing this, and also Finland is a smaller country, so in that sense, there is a lot of peer pressure, if you will, in the sense that people are observing what others are doing and these kinds of things. As of people still feeling lonely about this is because even if we say it in words like, yes, this is a strategic priority, I believe that other organizational areas are still put before. So are we talking technology, or with, or like CTOs, um, head of people and whatnot? But then this one comes like as something we have to do, but could wait. And I fear this is where there is a disconnection. And actually, it can't wait. This is a business imperative. I think this is something that I don't ever get tired of emphasizing. Addressing this is not something you are doing because you are a nice person. This is what you must do in order to thrive in a business.
And I love that you said that. And yesterday, somehow, as I was, doing some of the preparation work and so on, I came up with this quote by Simon Sinek, who said, "If we don't understand people, we don't understand business." So that is very much goes with what you just said. That this is a business imperative, and it's disappointing that we still need a business case to treat people with dignity and respect and value within our organizations.
It's an interesting one because in the UK context, at least, and with the people that I've been working with, and maybe it's because I tend not to work with people who don't have leadership buy-in, at least on paper, and I'll say a bit more on that in a second. I actually have been quite pleasantly surprised as my pessimistic self in the past 18 months to see a lot more leaders engage with this topic. I feel like there has been somewhat of a shift. But I feel like what I have noticed and what I've definitely seen as a gap is that there's actually we talk about like unconscious incompetence, where they don't actually realize as leaders that they're not as committed as they think they are. And I think this has been where the danger has come up, and where leaders will be like, yeah, I really care about this. It's a priority for me. And to give them the benefit of the doubt, because for me, you could look at this two ways. You could be saying that's completely not genuine, but even when it has appeared genuine to me, I feel like they don't have the skills, the knowledge, or the time or the heart to actually do that properly. So I've got a couple of examples I'll share. There was one leader who I've worked closely with, says all the right things. I genuinely do think that he means it. But when it's, been tough, like not giving that support to the person in the EDI function, it's things like not following up or chasing people when they haven't responded to them, not having the communications come from him because actually he's probably busy doing something else, or not actually standing up for that person. And I don't think it's because they didn't care or because they didn't notice. I think they just generally were not sure how they proper show up for inclusion and diversity and equity. So I think there's a little bit of a gap there. I know we've talked about a lot of inclusive leadership training or how we train leaders, but I think we've got them to a point where this is why it's important. This is how you show it and how you manage people. But there hasn't been enough around how you genuinely and consciously advocate for inclusion. So often when I do this work, I talk about like a growth mindset and what that means in the sense of being an inclusive leader. And often that means sometimes acknowledging when we've made mistakes and being forthright in apologising to people who are in these roles when we've let them down. We don't see that enough from leaders. And also that whole thing around thinking, I don't have the time for this today. You know, those leaders that come to the organisational event, they do the introduction, they stand up and make this really amazing speech and say how important this is for the organisation. And then you see them slip off about 15 minutes in because they've got another meeting or a call or whatever it might be. You know, there have been some leaders who've stayed for the whole one and they've engaged, but I don't think we've pushed leaders enough with the sort of training and development that has been done to actually make them aware of their everyday role in this.
And that is so powerful what you just talked about, because a lot of leaders and in general, the society expects the silver bullet. They expect it to be something super complicated that these consultants will come in and do, and there'll be new frameworks and new terms. And there is an element of that. But actually, this work begins with doing our homework and assessing actually our very core behaviors. As you said, when we arrive in these meetings, are we actually present? Do we stick through? Do we engage? Or even when we are there, we are just there as a figure and we are replying to our emails, or we are thinking about our next meeting, whatever. How engaged and how present we actually are in these topics and these meetings. Those are basics, and it's really concerning in a way that we do have these leaders making these crazy amounts of money and leading our organizations, and in a way they don't have basic people skills. What kind of diversity management we can talk about if we lack people management ability?
That's the thing, and I think we need to demand more and expect more from these leaders. I do think, like, as an industry, if we call it that, I don't like calling it it's an industry, but like as colleagues working in the space, I think we have kind of set these leaders up to do what we would now see as a bare minimum, because, and even obviously this data shows they haven't come through for so long and they still aren't for people. So even them sending an email out, putting something on LinkedIn is seen as something that we applaud. But now we need to push them a bit further to say, yeah, this is not acceptable. This is what you should know by now. This is how you should be treating people. This is how you authentically demonstrate that commitment.
Yeah, 100%. And then there is someone who has said in the comments, just reflected on what you've said, is I'll do, but it can wait. And I think that perfectly sums up, sort of my whole question is about, yeah, we really want to do it, but it can wait. And that's where it trickles down to the teams who don't receive the necessary support, funding, and ultimately the credibility that they deserve for this work. And so,
just to add, sorry.
Yeah, please.
I just wanted to add on that I think that I believe that what we have to understand about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that it's important. If you wait or if you postpone it, when it becomes urgent, it usually is because something has happened. And that is already catastrophic. If you're already in a situation that you could have avoided by acting inclusively, then more or less you had it coming. And I think that that is something that it is why it can't wait. Maybe you cannot foresee the risks, but you shouldn't be waiting for them. You shouldn't wait until it becomes urgent so that you decide to act on it, because then it's perceived as you're just trying to kill a fire, rather than this is actually core to your values and core to something that you value as important to the organization.
Yeah, 100%. And Amanda has said we need to access our very core behavior, is exactly what we've been talking about. And another LinkedIn user whose name I can't see because of privacy settings is saying that it's great that leaders are taught about these things, quote unquote, but implementing what is learned is a whole different ballgame altogether. Change is inevitable, but growth is intentional and optional. Thank you for that reflection. Very, very true. And as we sort of take this a step further, and Hayley already alluded to this slightly earlier about the proudest pieces of work. So that was one of the things that we investigated within this report. What have been the proudest pieces of work that your diversity, equity, and inclusion team has delivered in the past 18 months? And the top 5 things that came up were raising awareness of the diversity, equity, and inclusion as a function, organizing events, webinars, writing blogs more associated to certain history or celebration months, communicating best practice, conducting initial internal audits, and conducting basic training such as Introduction to DEI, Unconscious Bias, and Anti-Racism. And that is what Hayley was reflecting on earlier, saying that those things were disappointing, and they're my initial sentiments and feelings as well when I was reading that report and the results. And it's actually only 6% of respondents named creating strategy as one of the things that they've done over the past 18 months. And out of 100 respondents, that's disappointing. I'll leave that as that. But at the same time, when I look at the demographics of the survey in terms of people who responded, because I also asked people to reflect and let us know about their actual DEI experience. So what they've said is that 70% of the respondents have been in their DEI role for less than 3 years, and 42% have been less than 12 months. And when it comes to the organization as such, it's very, very similar. 60% of respondents said that their organization have had a DEI function for less than 3 years, and 32% have created one in the past 12 months. So I guess, my question around this, is there a correlation between the experience of the diversity, equity, and inclusion teams, because they are so new, and the maturity and level of work that we have delivered in the past 18 months? Have you seen such correlation, or do you sort of sense that there is a correlation between these two things?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, and I know people joined the webinar that I was part of on Monday about like well-being for people working in DEI roles. I think one of the things we didn't get the chance to talk about, what we talked about in our like little pre-meetings, is that actually sometimes we have to be honest with ourselves and be honest with each other as colleagues, that sometimes we do not have the skills or experience to carry out some of the things that are expected in this work. And that is sometimes the root of why we feel stress, under pressure, dissatisfaction. And I talked to Carly, who's one of the other panelists, about this, around how we need to become a bit more like shame resilient. It's okay to like not have all the answers. How do we access the support on that? How do we sit with that knowledge that actually we don't know that, or maybe we've got something wrong? Because that's the other thing that I do think happens in this line of work. People do get it wrong. We realise that all of the effort and time might have been put on this event, for example, when really we should have been focusing on the strategy. So I think a lot of people were hiring this year for new people. People were moving into this space, and I don't think a lot of people are truly equipped with how to work in this industry. I always say, like, having it as your passion is just not enough. You have to have the skills to navigate a lot of these challenges. It's an influencing role, it's a leadership role, even if you don't have that in your title.
Yes, and I think I would like to echo on that, because I think that, and this relates a lot with what I was just saying, related to how this is not a nice thing to do. This is not about intentions. This is not like, yay, let's do something rosy about it. And as I said, I'm a business strategist, so for me, this is very transparent. Like, this is a strategic thing you have to do, and this is a leadership trait. If you don't have it, then you're not equipped to drive it. And if you do not have leadership skills, then you're not equipped to drive this change. Why? Because it will face resistance. That is also something that is important to bear in mind. I believe that then these functions are new because people are realizing that this is something that needs to be within the organization. And why the achievements may be disappointing is because perhaps they are still on a campaigner stage, where they are actually still talking about why we should be talking about it. And this is how I also mean that this is a lonely job, because when you are talking to people who you are just trying to change their mind and tell them like this is how we have to behave daily in order to be inclusive, then of course you cannot have a strategy because people hasn't bought it yet. On the other hand, I believe that you have to have a strategy so that people buy you in. So if you do not have a clear plan as of what is that you want to achieve and how you are going to achieve it, people may also think like, okay, this all sounds very nice, uh, and what is going to happen next? So I believe that um, also oftentimes, I guess I'm not going to say actually oftentimes, I take that back. But what happens oftentimes is that organizations do hire a head of diversity, equity, and inclusion because it's something that everybody else is doing, but they don't understand what is going to happen with that role, and that is dangerous because you must know what is going to happen with that role. You must know what is expected from that person. Mm, and I also want to remind us that, as Hayley said here, we are talking with organizations that are already sold into the idea. There is still the universe of companies that do not even come close to us because they don't even prioritize this at all. So if the organizations we are talking with are already invested and they are in this early stage, you can imagine how it looks for people who haven't even realized the importance of this. So I just wanted to point out this, and I insist, I'm very business oriented, very strategy oriented. So for me, this is where I see the failure, that when you come up with something that is a systematic change, and then you're basically going to change people and processes and ways of behaving, then you must know how, and you must have the answers. And if you do not, you run the risk of actually not having people not buy anything.
100%, and I think both of you alluded to it and reflected on the fact that the skill is important and passion is not enough. And there are plenty of people who are passionate, who call themselves advocates, practitioners, experts, whatever a DEI expert even means, right? There are plenty of those people out there, but not necessarily they have the the leadership skill that is needed into this role. And actually, a lot of people are afraid of that word, leadership. I'm not a leader. Well, you have to be a leader in this space. You do have to be, every space that you show up in, you have to be a leader. So if you are afraid of that word, or you've got imposter around that, or lack of confidence around that, that's one of the things that you really, really need to address, because a lot of the conversations around these topics are uncomfortable. And a lot of these conversations happen with executives who have got bags of confidence, or not necessarily, the knowledge that is needed. So you do have to be in a space where you can push back and challenge and talk at that level. So skill is super important, and we'll come back to that anyway. And we've got a comment here from Zinga saying that absolutely, in relation to finding the right people to be in this space, there should be diversity from professionals in this space. They all seem to come via the HR route, when actually skills and change management, project management, innovation are just a few that are also required. I absolutely echo this, that a lot of people are parachuted into these roles from HR space, or someone, the most active, a person who has been the most of an activist within HR space has been parachuted into this role. But actually, there's so much more than just HR skills. And actually, another point I'm going to make here is that, and that's another thing that the report talks about, is that 1 out of 5 of our HR leaders have no culture or DEI expertise, delivery experience. And that's 20% of our HR leaders. So we have got generations of HR leaders that have been built on little to no experience and knowledge around culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, because HR is more of a different kind of business function. I'll say as much as that. And so, of course, bodies such as CIPD and others are now investing in plugging these D&I modules into their core accreditation or qualification and courses, but we still have got a legacy of people who are in these spaces and who should be championing this work, who've got no knowledge about it. And as we talk about sort of, the maturity and the skill, one of the questions that I asked in the survey was around, where do you find diversity, equity, and inclusion information? What are some of the sources of for information, knowledge, and insight. And that was quite of an interesting one for me, because most people named such sources as LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. And when asked about some of the external bodies as CIPD, Korn Ferry, Stonewall, Business Disability Forum, Business and Community were named. However, upon reflection, respondents admitted that the information they had access to was more informative than actionable, which made them assume that the D&I conversations in the wider industry are not yet mature enough. And my question to you ladies is, how mature do you feel the D&I is, or diversity, equity, inclusion is across the wider industry? And is this sentiment around the fact that it's not mature until we can afford to be immature within our organizations, is that accurate and acceptable?
It's an interesting one, because I think I take issue with this whole idea that like we have to have a practical approach, or things need to always be actionable, because we're looking at creating systemic change. There's no, when I see a report and it has like a checklist on things you can do, I always look at it with a pinch of salt, because actually every organization is different, and you know, it's not one, let's do step 1, 2, 3 and bang, we've solved all of these issues. So sometimes we actually need to just apply our own skills, link it back to our own knowledge of our organisation, and that's how we can probably best use these reports. I think what's interesting is that I mean, bias here. I worked for Business in the Community for 2 years and think the work that they do is great, but you know, they've been talking about this and leading in this space for decades. So there are people out there who have led the way for us, and have been campaigning to move us along. So I think there's, yeah, I guess I don't know if that probably answers the question, but that's something that I'd say. I do think the issue with the focus on HR or HR related bodies producing this information is that the reality is, in probably 90% of organizations, and that's me being generous, HR is there to maintain the status quo. It's there to protect the organization, to retain the culture of an organization, whatever they see that as. It's not there to bring about systemic change. So if we are relying on this change from HR and HR professionals, we're going to find ourselves unstuck, because honestly, HR tend to be the blockers when it comes to this kind of work.
Yes, a couple of, well, I actually have many thoughts in my head, but just to go back to where people are getting information from, mm, I was actually surprised and not so happy to learn that a lot of the knowledge comes from, for example, social media. Of course, is a place where we share knowledge and these kinds of things, but oftentimes it comes with opinions, and opinions tend to reflect our own thoughts about it. So therefore, they are biased. I worry that is a source of knowledge, because if we are not questioning, and if we do not have a network of people with whom we can bounce those ideas and question those elements, I fear there is a danger. Another thing, and resonated to what Hayley says, is like we can't possibly go, for example, to organizations and say like, okay, step number one, you are going to open this box, and then from there you're going to find a lemon, and then you're going to, we can't do that, because the people who know the organizations is the people who are within the organizations. Of course, there are ways of relationships with customers with whom we could possibly learn more, and then we always have actionable things, but they always have to anyways be created in collaboration with them. We do not have magic answers for anybody who is not invested in the process. I can tell you you need a roadmap for this, and I even can tell you like what are the steps that in my eyes would work. But if people are not going to be taking those steps, or if people are not in the maturity level of actually taking them, that plan is going to do very little. And on the contrary, some people may even be frustrated and be like, huh, this doesn't work. But it works, and it will only work if the structural change comes from within the organization. And I believe that this is also something that Hayley was referring to, which is we are there to support the change, to support with the knowledge. And I believe that this is also by what you were saying. We are leaders in the sense that we are pushing this change and we are challenging status quo and whatnot. But ultimately, these plans and these answers are always customized. We can't possibly have like a list of things that works for everyone because it does not exist. Simple as that.
That's right. And just to reflect on what both of you were talking about is that we are often, within organizations, this diversity, equity, and inclusion teams are a one-person band or single digits. And then we look around the organization and you would have marketing teams and HR teams and finance teams and technology teams of people in dozens or even hundreds. And then we expect this one person to suddenly deliver this massive culture change. So the thing that makes me reflect on that, actually, yes, diversity and inclusion professionals are there to facilitate the change. They are there to spread the knowledge, but they're not project managers to project manage that work, and they should never be. This work should be done by everyone, and diversity, equity, and inclusion related statement or culture related statement should be tied into everyone's job descriptions, and it should be tied into everyone's performance, not just diversity, equity, and inclusion person is this hero trying to deliver change in organizations that sometimes are thousands and tens of thousands of people. So with all of the things that we've talked about today, and some of the stats have been, fairly bleak, and to Yesmith's point, in terms of, finding some silver linings to this work, how do you feel we can make 2022 a year of meaningful diversity, equity, inclusion action and impact? How do you envision us to do better and shift into a space of meaningful work in 2022? What are some of your sort of call to actions?
Well, what we usually do is we pick a priority based on the trends. Here in Finland, what we have identified is going to come for 2022 is to have measurement of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I believe that is something that is going to happen around all the countries, because I think that oftentimes we have approached this from the position that we are willing to do something, but we actually don't possess any knowledge as of what is actually looking like. And furthermore, this information is important because you can't possibly know whether you are having an impact when you are not measuring. So what I believe that 2022 should look like, in order to make actually tangible changes and to have people advocating for things, is to have your company having an assessment as of how it looks like the situation right now, and on the basis of that, make a plan as of what your priorities are going to be, and then later on then measure again, in order to know whether you have made progress or not, and if the strategy that you have chosen makes sense or not. And this is actually alluding also to what Hayley was saying at the beginning. Like, I was hoping that people would say that they have gained trust from the employees, or these kinds of things, but we can't have that if we don't have the data. We don't know if we are not measuring it. And another thing that came up, for example, in the forum that we organized a couple of weeks ago, was that oftentimes we think we are more inclusive than we really are, because we are good people in essence. Nobody is mean in that sense, and I think that this is a misconception too, that people think like, but we are good people. That is not what we are questioning. I think that what we need to question is whether the systems are allowing us to thrive, and because of that we need to measure. So I would, if I have many ideas in my head, but if I would pick, if someone were to ask me what would you suggest I would do for 2022, I would most definitely go for making an educated and measurable assessment of where your organization stands up, when it comes to DNI.
Yeah, I'm going to just add a little bit to that point and then bring my own. I think that I've looked at so many different strategies, action plans over the past year that people have produced, and yeah, it always surprises me that it's like some of even the actions they put on are not properly measurable. Now, I don't mean that every single thing has to have a data point attached to it, but taking it from the world that I've worked in for a long time in charities and even in sport, you can design outcomes and come up with ways to measure those. So yeah, that's so important. And I do think that this space needs to be better at including outcomes in those kind of strategies. I think for me personally, I think we need to think about really what we're looking at when it comes to this DEI work as colleagues working in this space, because I think sometimes we are reproducing some of the systems and qualities of systems that we're actually looking to challenge. And Melanie made a comment around social media being an important source. And I would agree with that to an extent, because I think something that we need to do in this space is actually to democratize and make information as transparent and as accessible as possible. Because what is happening a bit is that there are organizations and networks that are sort of gatekeeping knowledge, or making information not accessible. And I do think that is like something that we need to challenge. It's very like colonial in its design, and it's everything that we're looking to go against. That's just one example. I talked about it the other day as well. Like, there's a lot of competition that goes on, like doing this for sake of competition, whether that's one organisation competing with each other or one D&I leader competing with another to try and climb up a ladder to a new position that a flashy, shiny new organisation is not the essence of this work. There are so many behaviours that show up in this space that completely contradict what we're looking to do. So I do think we need to look at systemically changing this line of work and actually decolonizing it in some aspects as well.
100%. And I guess, part of that is we have to be willing and open to do our homework and to start assessing the environments where we are in. Because if you're saying, tell us what to do, or let's do something about it, and yet then you're not prepared to open up your books about pay parity, be it gender, be it ethnic, about retention rates, around employing, whatever it might be, that you're not prepared to open up those conversations and books and actually show that, then you're not prepared to do this work. And you're forever going to be walking around the world looking for organizations and consultants that sell you solutions, and there are plenty of those. And hence there is that conflict between who's here to do the work for the right reasons and who's here to collect the checks and move on. So there's absolutely a lot that we need to do within the D&I industry ourselves. And just to reflect on what Yesmith said as well, around that this work is not about questioning anyone's how good of a human being you are. This work is not about you. This work is more than that. And often we're starting this work with I, which there is an element of it, but this is much bigger than that. And also to reflect on some of the things that you said previously that I thought I wrote them down and I thought they were very, very profound. Hayley, you reflected upon the fact, how do we as D&I leaders access support, or rather, how do internal DEI managers or advocates access the networks of support? About the fact that your passion is not enough, but this is a leadership role and it requires more skills than just passion and HR experience. And also what Yesmith talked about, do we have access to networks of people who we can ideate with and who we can pull that support in from? And the things that you talked about, where are some of the motivators for me to obviously for creating this survey, but beyond that, also for me, how I am as a DEI practitioner committing to walk into 2022. And it is very much, from the space of consciousness, from the space of action, because we're always going to be raising awareness. We're still going to be reading them books, and we're still going to be going to them, webinars and so on. But at some point, there has to be some sort of action. And I think also with all the bandwagons and obviously expectations that are out there, organizations and people get overwhelmed that they need to reach some sort of goal quickly. And this work doesn't happen quickly, and we have to be prepared to break it down and take those steps that will eventually lead us there, rather than get overwhelmed and then just basically bin this piece of work just because we haven't reached what we set ourselves out to reach at the beginning. And what Hayley was talking about, instead of measuring those outputs and not necessarily appear as quickly, measure how you're building trust with your employees, because that's a big one. Once you get those foundations done, the rest of the work, those outputs and outcomes will come much easier. And so again, reflecting around those, where do we access support? Where do we access information? Where do we have networks? That was one of the reasons why I created CORPA, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion ecosystem that consists of two components. And one is a 12-week diversity, equity, and inclusion accelerator, which is very much equipping our colleagues with those leadership, communications, change management, project management tools, so they are more rounded professionals to lean into this work. And the second aspect of that is the community, where if we are a one-person band in our organization, where do we go to ideate? Where do we go with our challenges and frustrations? How do we knowledge share? How do we resource share? Because there's so much knowledge that sits within isolation that we need to bring to a table together, because again, there is no competition within diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we need to start working together as a quote unquote industry. And so for those who have not yet received their copy of the study that we've been unpacking and want to find out more about the ecosystem that I've just talked about, head to Lakehouse website and drop your email in the subscription window, and I'll send you all of those details over, or DM me here on LinkedIn. And I also wanted to say that when it comes to Diversity Accelerator, so we'll be launching this phase by phase, but the Accelerator, the first cohort launches on 3rd of February 2022. I will keep them very intimate and small groups of people. So we're talking about 10 members, just so we can make it a very interactive conversation and actively learn and discuss. So make sure that you grab your seat, because the first 10 people will also get 50% off the membership. So as we sort of wrap up the conversation and sort of come to some of the conclusions, how would you say, or do you have any sort of final thoughts or calls to action for people who are looking into 2022, and whether joining this work, doing this work, and wanting to do better? Any sort of final thoughts? Hayley, you want to kick us off? Yesmith, you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, Yesmith, go first. Go on, Yesmith.
Yes. Well, in my eyes, I think that maybe it is different. Like if you want to be an expert in these concepts, or if you want to start advocating for these topics, I think that it's important to make a self-assessment of whether we are experts yet. Because I think that, and this is something that I would like to emphasize, because as Hayley was saying, sometimes we're very passionate about things, but I believe if we are not ready yet to actually help organizations or persons to drive change, it's better to wait before you actually call yourself uh, either a consultant or an expert in these topics. And I am saying this with all utter respect. But the thing is that this topic is questioned enough. And then if we have more people who believe that their passion is enough to drive change, I think is going to be detrimental for all. And personally, what I hope for is to have change, because this is something we all care about, and then it has the nice consequences as having good businesses and all. But this is something that we should be doing, and then reaching out to networks, as Viva said. I think that if you want to be there, you are in a very good possibility to turning your passion into something that takes you farther. But then you need the networks, you need to learn more and more. I also would like to say that the aspect of community should never be undermined. So I'm resonating to what Baiba says. We here at Inclusive, we do have a community because in organizations, if you are alone, you may be frustrated, but if you're bouncing your ideas with others who are doing the same, it doesn't feel as lonely anymore. And then you can have ideas as of how you are driving change, how others are driving change, and then you can test pilot them with others. So I recommend people to reach out to communities, to contacts, and to learn more and more. Um, I believe, just as a conclusion, that is what I would like to emphasize: the power of community, the power of ever learning. And I think that all of us who have signed up for this job, we understand that we will never stop in the learning curve. So that's my last words.
Hayley, dear, you're on mute. We have to say it once during this.
I thought I unmuted myself in preparation. Yeah, I think the sense of community can't be it can't be undervalued. You know, creating solidarity amongst ourselves is so important. I think the other thing I would just say is that going into 22, like, make sure that you have either booked in time between now and then to rest and reset, or that you have someone on the horizon, because it has been a long year for everyone. It's been intense, and part of this is feeling under pressure that you're the only person who can do this work, so you can't take the time off, but you absolutely have to do it for you, and your well-being. And as Yesmith just said around, like, your passion, I think it can be detrimental, because if you don't have the passion, you don't have the skills, and we won't make the change that's needed. But actually, sometimes just relying on passion alone can be detrimental to your own mental health and well-being, because actually, if you care so much, and you're expecting things to change a lot quicker, and you don't have those skills to bring that about, it's not going to be good for you either. So people who are interested in getting into space, it's definitely one to consider, because the more you care, the more it hurts, and the more frustrating it can be as well.
Thank you, ladies, and thank you, Hayley, for mentioning mental well-being. I was really looking forward to cover some of that on this session as well, but we're almost at an hour. And but however, I did expect that would happen, so I have created another LinkedIn Live for next week, where I'm going to be going live with two well-being advocates and professionals, where we'll be specifically unpacking that sense of well-being and how well-being affects. Or rather, how well-being is affected in the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I just also, before we wrap up, want to acknowledge Jesse, who's just made a comment also around a great source for information are your employees, and we just do not ask them enough of their contributions. When we sort of look at our HR leaders, at executives for answers, but actually there are a lot of people within our organizations with specific knowledge, and we just need to rely on and ask them more. So that's another powerful one, to create more open spaces within the organization, safe spaces within the organization, where we can talk and ultimately bring our whole selves to these spaces. So Hayley, Yesmith, thank you so much for being here with me and testing the LinkedIn Live with me, holding my hand. But in the end, I think we've done a beautiful job with unpacking the survey and digging quite deep. And thank you for all of your reflections and expertise and all the case studies, and bringing a real international spin to it. So I really, I'm very, very grateful for both of you. I'm really grateful for having both of you as fellow DEI colleagues in my network. And I'm looking forward. In my bones, I'm feeling that 2022 is going to be a good year. And yeah, I'll definitely take time to rest to make sure that actually we've got the energy to execute what's ahead of us. So thank you both. Thank you everyone who joined in, and thank you everyone who's going to be listening or watching this on replay. Please connect to Hayley. Please connect to Yesmith. They're I'm going to say they're open and happy to engage.
Yes.
Thank you for nodding. Otherwise, you'd be like, oh, I'm fully booked for 2022. So, and I look forward to reconnecting again next week, when we're going to be taking this a step further and talking about well-being within D&I. So thank you so much, and enjoy your weekend all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
both.
Thank you all for checking in too. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks for the space, Bye.
Thank you, ladies.
Bye.